The air was thick with sweat and fear. Screams echoed off concrete walls, mixing with the clang of steel gates and the sharp hiss of tear gas. Guards in riot gear stormed to the cell block, shields raised, batons striking. Flames rose from a pile of burning mattresses. Inmates ran barefoot through water and blood, their voices blending into one desperate roar. This wasn't a movie. It was real. It was Carandiru Prison, Sao Paulo, Brazil, 1992. In less than 20 minutes, more than 100 prisoners lay dead after police opened fire to stop a riot. No one ever forgot the sound of that day. That massacre became the dark heartbeat of a truth few dare to face. Around the world, there are prisons so dangerous, so hopeless, that even death seems like escape. This story is about those places. The 10 real-life hellholes where survival is the only rule. After the smoke cleared in Carandiru, investigators stepped into the cell blocks. The walls were full of bullet holes. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear. Rats crawled over blood-stained floors. Yet within a week, new prisoners were moved in. For years, officials called it a lesson. The inmates called it the day the world stopped caring. Thousands of miles away, under the dry sun of South Africa, another prison breathed with its own kind of violence. Pollsmoor. It was built for 4,000 men, but held more than 8,000. Here, gangs ruled everything, the food, the beds, even the air you breathed. New arrivals were stripped, beaten, and forced to choose a side before the guards finished their roll call. Tattoos decided your rank. Knives made from toothbrushes decided your future. A former guard once said, "Pollsmoor isn't a prison. It's a war you live in." He wasn't wrong. When rival gangs fought, guards locked the gates and waited for silence. The walls dripped with smoke from burning clothes. Somewhere inside those walls, a young inmate named Darius learned to keep his eyes down and his mouth shut. He served 5 years and came out with more scars and memories. While Pollsmoor raged in the south, across the icy plains of Russia stood another monster, Black Dolphin Prison. The guards called their prisoners dead men walking. Each inmate, a murderer or terrorist, was forced to walk bent double with eyes on the floor. There was no sound except keys and commands. The cells were steel boxes, each with solid door, then another steel gate. The food came through a small hatch, and lights never turned off. Prisoners slept with their hands outside the blanket, so guards could see they weren't hiding weapons. One warden once said, "No one escapes Black Dolphin. The only way out is death." And he meant it. But not every hellhole used bullets or bars to break people. In Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand, known as the Bangkok Hilton, the cruelty came from time itself. Inmates wore leg irons 24 hours a day, sometimes for years. The cells held 50 men, all sleeping side by side like stacked logs. Food was a bowl of rice soup twice a day. On execution mornings, the guards read a list of names. The chosen men were given 1 hour to pray before being led away. Thousands of miles west, in Venezuela, stood La Sabaneta Prison. It looked like a crumbling school, but it was worse than any battlefield. The guards stayed outside the walls, leaving the prisoners to run the inside. Gangs built their own cells, sold food, and held guns made from metal pipes. Every week brought new fights, new fires, new dead. Once, during a single riot, 61 people died in 2 hours. And then there was a place they called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ADX Florence, hidden under the mountains of Colorado, USA. It was meant to be escape-proof, but the real trap was the silence. Prisoners spent 23 hours a day alone in rooms made of concrete. Their only view a slit of sky they could barely see. One inmate wrote that he hadn't touched another human being in 17 years. "It's not a prison," he said. "It's a box for ghosts." Each of these places had its own rhythm of suffering, its own sound of madness. But together, they formed a map of humanity's darkest corners, a network of walls built not just to punish, but to erase. By the time the lights dimmed in La Sabaneta, the smell of smoke filled the night air again. Somewhere, someone shouted for help. The guards didn't go in. They never did. The fire climbed higher, orange and hungry, painting the sky above Maracaibo red. And inside one of those burning cells, a hand reached out through the bars. The man behind it screamed one word, again and again, freedom, until the smoke swallowed his voice. Outside, the reporters gathered at the gates, taking pictures of the rising flames. One of them whispered, "This isn't the end of a riot. It's the beginning of something worse." He was right, because by dawn, news would spread of another outbreak, this time not in Venezuela, but in a prison across the ocean. Another hellhole was about to erupt. By the time the sun rose over the Pacific, another prison had exploded into chaos. Inmates at San Quentin State Prison in California were banging on the steel doors, shouting over each other as guards flooded the tiers. Somewhere deep inside the prison, a fight had turned into a full-blown riot. Smoke poured from a burning mattress tossed from the upper floor. The sirens wailed again, that same desperate sound that echoed through every hellhole on earth. San Quentin wasn't new to violence. It was one of America's oldest prisons, built in the 1800s and still holding more than 3,000 men, many waiting for death. The walls carried the memories of executions, of names whispered down to the decades. When the death roll lights flicked on each morning, the men in those cells looked up at the same ceiling and wondered if today would be their last. But behind the riots and the fear, there was something worse. Hopelessness. A guard once said, "This place doesn't kill you with bullets. It kills you with time." That's what happened to Raymond Cole, a man who'd been on death row for 15 years. Every day was the same. Wake up, count the cracks in the wall, listen to the echo of chains. When he was finally told his sentence might be overturned, he didn't smile. He just whispered, "Too late." Meanwhile, halfway across the world, another kind of terror ruled the night in Rikers Island, New York City. It wasn't built for torture. It became it. Overcrowded, violent, and chaotic. Rikers turned into a symbol of everything broken about the system. Guards feared the prisoners. Prisoners feared each other. And everyone feared the silence after the lights went out. A teenager named Caleb Browder once spent 3 years there without a trial. For 2 of those years, he sat in solitary confinement for no crime proven. When he was finally released, he told reporters, "You don't come out the same." He was right. He didn't. His story broke America's heart and forced the city to admit that Rikers wasn't just a jail. It was a wound. Across the border in Mexico, El Chapo Guzman sat in Altiplano prison, staring at the small drain under his shower floor. To everyone else, it was just a pipe. To him, it was the beginning of freedom. While the world believed no one could escape, his men had spent months digging a tunnel more than a mile long, complete with air pipes, lights, and a motorcycle on rails. On July 11th, 2015, he climbed into that hole and vanished into the dark. When guards checked his cell, they found only the sound of dripping water and the empty space where the floor used to be. It was the most humiliating moment in Mexico's prison history. The cameras showed a nation that even the tightest walls couldn't hold back corruption. El Chapo was free for 6 months before they caught him again, but by then his escape had already become legend, a reminder that in some hellholes, the power isn't held by the guards, but by those locked inside. Back in the United States, a different kind of darkness thrived at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. It wasn't violence that defined Holmesburg, it was science. Between the 1950s and 1970s, doctors used inmates as test subjects for chemicals, creams, and drugs. They were told it was for medical research, but many didn't know what was being put on their skin. Decades later, declassified files revealed experiments with dioxin, the same chemical used in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. Inmates still alive from that time described the pain as burning from the inside out. They were given a few dollars for their suffering, and the world moved on. But the truth never left those walls. From the frozen corridors of Russia's Black Dolphin to the sweltering chaos of La Sabaneta, the pattern was always the same: control, collapse, silence. Every country built its own version of a cage, and every cage had the same outcome: broken bodies, broken minds, and a system too big to change. In Thailand's Bang Kwang prison, nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, a foreign inmate once said, "We're buried alive here." He wasn't lying. Prisoners were locked inside concrete cells with no beds, no shoes, and no hope. Execution days came without warning. A loudspeaker called out names, and the rest of the inmates froze, afraid to even breathe. When the guards came for them, everyone knew what it meant. Thousands of miles away, the Pollsmoor prison gangs sharpened their blades in silence, while Carandiru's ghost whispered in the cracks of its demolished walls. But even after Carandiru was torn down, new prisons rose in its place, bigger, colder, and just as merciless. By the time night fell across all 10 hellholes, the world above kept moving. Cars, laughter, television, life. But deep inside those walls, 1,000 men stare at ceilings, dreaming of a sky they'd never see again. At Rikers, a young guard on night shift turned off his radio and looked through the glass at the block. Something in him felt uneasy. The lights flickered once, then twice. The cameras went black for a full 30 seconds. When they came back on, the cell doors in Roby were open. "Control," he whispered into his radio. "Something's wrong in Block B." A voice answered, calm and cold. "Stay put. We're sealing the unit." Then, over the intercom, the same eerie phrase that haunted ADX Florence years ago came through again, distorted, mechanical, and chilling. "You can't lock away what's already inside." The guard froze. Behind him, footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The power went out across Rikers Island. For a full minute, darkness swallowed the entire complex. The only light came from the glow of the Hudson River through barred windows and the dull red emergency bulbs flickering down the hallways. Then came the screams, raw, human, terrified. Guards shouted orders. Prisoners banged on doors, and alarms wailed in the distance. No one knew what had happened, only that something inside those walls had snapped. When the lights finally came back on, one of the tiers was empty. 12 cells stood open, and every camera feed showed the same thing. Doors unlocked, untouched, no signs of forced entry. The prison went into total lockdown. Helicopters circled overhead, and news stations picked up the story within hours. Security failure at Rikers Island, dozens missing. But this wasn't an escape. The 12 men hadn't gone anywhere. They were found sitting in the courtyard at dawn, silent, eyes unfocused, whispering the same sentence over and over again. "We saw the others." When questioned, none of them could explain who the others were. One inmate said he saw a long corridor stretching through fire and water. Another said he heard voices calling his name. It sounded like a nightmare, but every one of them told the same story. No matter their language background or gang, the warden dismissed it as panic, but the footage told a different tale. Before the power failure, the security cameras showed faint static patterns moving down the halls, like shadows that weren't attached to anything. The FBI came in to investigate, but Rikers wasn't the only one hit that night. Half a world away, in La Sabaneta prison in Venezuela, a similar power surge fried the control systems. Guards are reported seeing cell doors open on their own. One officer collapsed after hearing someone whisper his name in an empty block. Within 24 hours, for other prisons, Black Dolphin, Pollsmoor, Carandiru, and Kwang, reported power disturbances, alarms, and unexplained movements. In Russia, the warden of Black Dolphin ordered a full inspection. Guards entered cell 208 and found an inmate crouched in the corner, humming softly. The man had carved words into the wall. English words, even though he didn't speak a single one. It's all one prison. Back in the U.S. at ADX Florence, technicians reviewing the system logs found something impossible. The power grid at Rikers had surged from their own control servers. But ADX hadn't had a power connection to New York in years. The engineer who found the data quit the next morning. As days passed, the story spread. Reporters tried to connect the dots, but officials denied everything. Still, whispers began circulating online. 10 prisons across the globe, all with the same signs: malfunctions, power drops, strange messages. People began calling it the network of hellholes. Then came the footage. A journalist in Sao Paulo leaked video from a drone flying over the ruins of Carandiru. The prison had been shut down for years, but the drone captured something no one could explain. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading toward a collapsed cell block, and stopping at a wall. On that wall, spray painted in red, were the words, "You can't lock away what's already inside." The video went viral overnight. Millions watched. Some said it was fake. Others said it was proof that something connected these prisons, something older than walls, older than men. At Pollsmoor, a young inmate named Jamal began to hear voices through the pipes. At first, he thought it was other prisoners talking, but soon the voices began answering his thoughts. "Where are you?" he whispered one night. The voice replied, "Everywhere." Halfway around the world, in Thailand, the warden of Bang Kwang woke up to the sound of sirens. When he reached his office, the CCTV monitors were showing live feeds, not from his prison, but from others. Black Dolphin, Rikers, Pollsmoor. On every screen, the same thing played out. Prisoners standing in their cells, staring up at the cameras, unmoving, synchronized. It lasted for 1 minute and 42 seconds. Then every monitor went dark. News agencies called it a technical glitch. But when they reviewed the footage, the timestamp showed something terrifying. The events had happened at the exact same time, down to the second. In the U.S., the FBI quietly contacted foreign governments to compare records. All 10 prisons had received anonymous digital transmissions before the blackouts. Each message contained only a list of coordinates. 10 locations across the globe, forming a perfect circle when connected on a map. The center of that circle? The middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Days later, a research vessel picked up strange radio signals from that area. Low-frequency pulses repeating one line in a digital pattern that matched the intercom message first heard years ago at ADX Florence. You can't lock away what's already inside. As the story spread, governments denied everything. Power systems were updated, new security measures installed, and the world tried to move on. But the guards who'd lived through it didn't forget. In Rikers, the night shift officer who first heard the voice left his job. He moved upstate, bought a small house, and stopped watching the news. But every night, as he lay in bed, he swore he could still hear the echo of those words through his wall. Soft, steady, impossible to ignore. And one night, as the wind rattled the window, his radio, unplugged and silent for months, clicked on by itself. Through the static came a faint, distorted whisper. "We're still here."